"Nobody moves," Lena said, her voice cutting across the entire floor like a blade through silence. "Not one of you." 36 military dogs had stopped cold. Mid-stride, mid-drill, mid-everything frozen in place, every single one of them locked onto a single woman none of them had ever seen before. Not their handlers. Not Commander Cole. Her. An unknown woman who had walked through a restricted gate past armed security onto a classified training floor, and in 12 seconds had done what no handler, no command, no protocol had ever achieved. She had stopped them all, and nobody in that building could explain how. Stay with me to the very end, because this story is going to shake something loose in you. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see. The morning had started like every other morning at Blackridge K9 Command, loud, disciplined, and exactly on schedule. 36 military working dogs moved through their training rotations with the kind of precision that took years to build. Handlers called commands. Dogs executed. The whole facility operated like a machine, and Commander Ethan Cole liked it that way. He stood at the edge of the main training floor, arms crossed, watching his teams run through their drills, and he felt the satisfaction of a man who believed completely that everything was under control. He had no idea that control was about to walk through his front gate. "Commander?" Sergeant Dale Pruitt appeared at his elbow, clipboard in hand, voice low. "We've got a situation at the perimeter." Cole didn't look up. Define situation. "A civilian woman. No credentials, no appointment, no escort. She walked right past the checkpoint." That got his attention. Cole turned slowly. "She walked past security." "Yes, sir." "And no one stopped her?" Pruitt hesitated. "They tried." Cole stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the main training floor. He heard it before he saw it, the silence. Not the practiced quiet of a controlled drill, but something else entirely. The kind of silence that falls when something unexpected happens and nobody knows what to do next. He pushed through the side door and stopped. Every single dog on that floor had gone still. Not at attention, they weren't responding to a command. They had simply stopped. Mid-stride, mid-drill, mid-everything. Brutus, a 110-pound Belgian Malinois who had thrown 2 handlers last month, sat perfectly square. Head lifted, ears forward. Atlas, the German shepherd, who required a specialized muzzle during transport, stood motionless beside his handler, without so much as a tremor. Kaiser, the Dutch shepherd, who had failed 3 consecutive readiness evaluations, had his gaze locked on a single point across the floor. They were all looking at the same thing. She was standing near the center of the floor, completely still, hands at her sides. She wasn't reaching for the dogs. She wasn't making any sounds. She was simply there, a woman in a plain gray jacket and worn boots, maybe early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, carrying nothing but a small notebook pressed against her hip. Cole's first thought was that she had to be a threat. His second thought, which arrived almost immediately, was that she absolutely did not look like one. His third thought was the one that stayed with him. She looked like she belonged there more than anyone else in the room. "Who is that?" he said quietly. Pruitt was already at his side. "Her name is Lena Cross. That's all we got from the front desk before she walked through." "Get her out." "We've been trying, sir. Nobody wants to be the one to move toward her right now." Cole looked around the floor. 14 handlers, all trained, all combat experienced, all standing exactly where they'd been when she walked in. Not a single one of them was moving. He took a breath and walked out onto the floor himself. She didn't look at him when he approached. She was watching the dogs, not scanning, not studying, but watching in the specific way that told him she was reading something the rest of them couldn't see. Her eyes moved from Brutus to Atlas to a brown and black shepherd named Shadow, who was trembling slightly in the far corner, and her expression did something Cole couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't clinical distance. It was something that sat between grief and recognition. "Ma'am?" He kept his voice even, authoritative but not aggressive. "This is a restricted facility. You need to identify yourself and come with me." "Lena Cross." she said without turning. I know it's restricted. I'll be happy to go with you in a few minutes. You'll come with me now. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were a steady dark gray, and they moved over his face with the same deliberate calm she'd used on the dogs. If you raise your voice or make a sudden movement right now, Brutus is going to plant himself between us, and it's going to take you 20 minutes to move him. Is that how you want to spend the next 20 minutes, Commander? Cole stopped walking. He looked at Brutus. The Malinois hadn't moved, but his weight had shifted almost imperceptibly onto his front legs. His eyes were on Cole. He's not protecting you, Cole said carefully. He doesn't know you. He doesn't need to know me. He's protecting himself. There's a difference. She turned back to the floor. Your dogs aren't aggressive, Commander. They're afraid. All 36 of them. The aggression is a symptom. The silence stretched across the entire floor. Handlers were looking at each other. Nobody spoke. Cole crossed his arms. That's a significant claim for someone who walked in off the street. Then let me prove it. He didn't let her prove it. Not yet. He walked her to his office, sat her down across from his desk, and spent 12 minutes trying to establish exactly who she was and what authority she thought she had to set foot in a classified training facility. She gave him almost nothing. She'd worked with military and law enforcement K9 programs. She'd consulted for 3 facilities in the last 4 years. She had no current government affiliation and no paperwork with her. She had heard about Blackridge through channels she didn't name, and she had come because of what she'd heard. And what did you hear? Cole asked. Lena set her notebook on the edge of his desk and folded her hands over it. I heard that you've had 4 dogs washed out in 8 months. I heard that 2 handlers were hospitalized in the last year from dog-related injuries, both labeled as handler error. I heard that your top unit Ghost Team 7 has failed its last 2 operational readiness evaluations. And I heard that you're about to lose 3 more dogs to the euthanasia recommendation list because they're classified as unpredictably aggressive. Cole kept his face still. Where did you get that information? Is it accurate? The silence was its own answer. Cole pushed back from his desk and stood. Ms. Cross, I don't know who you are or what you think gives you the right to walk into my facility and make assessments about a program you've seen for about 4 minutes. But I can tell you that everything happening here is within normal operational parameters. Brutus bit through a steel cable last March, Lena said. That's not an operational parameter. That's a dog in psychological crisis. Cole went quiet. Atlas has lost 14 pounds since January, she continued. His coat is showing stress markers. Kaiser won't make eye contact with his handler during off-lead exercises, which means he's not reading him, he's avoiding him. And Shadow, the one in the back corner who was trembling. He's been trembling every morning for 3 months. You have a note in his file that says, possibly developing joint issues. It's not joint issues. Cole sat back down. Slowly. You reviewed our files. I reviewed what I could access. She paused. You want to know how I walked past your checkpoint. Your security officer recognized me. We've worked together before, and he didn't know whether to stop me or wave me through because nobody had ever told him what to do if I showed up. That's not a security failure. That's a paperwork gap. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I can give you right now. Cole studied her. He'd spent 22 years in the military and another 6 running Blackridge. He knew how to read people, had staked his career on it, and his career had been by every measurable standard successful. But this woman was giving him almost nothing to read. No performance, no angle, no obvious agenda. She was simply sitting across from him, steady and unhurried, waiting. What do you want? He asked finally. 3 days, Lena said. Give me 3 days on the floor with your teams. At the end of 3 days, if I haven't shown you something that changes how you see what's happening here, I'll walk out and you'll never hear my name again. And if you do show me something, she looked at him steadily, then you'll have some decisions to make. Come, he said no. She stayed anyway, or rather, she made it clear that leaving would require more logistical effort than he currently had bandwidth for, and Cole, who had 15 priorities competing for his attention that morning, made a calculation. He would give her 2 hours on the floor under direct supervision. 2 hours, and then she would submit to a formal identification process, and he would decide what happened next. She agreed without hesitation. What happened in those 2 hours rewrote everything Cole thought he understood about his facility. She started with Brutus. Handler Marcus Webb. 4 years with the program, approached with Brutus on a lead. His posture was exactly what Cole had trained it to be. Straight, confident, authoritative. Brutus was manageable on the lead, but his eyes were restless, scanning body tight as a coiled spring. Lena stood 6 feet away and watched them approach. "Stop there," she said to Webb. He stopped. "Ma'am? What does Brutus do when you reach for his collar?" Webb glanced at Cole, who gave him a small nod. He locks up. Sometimes he'll give a warning growl. "Does he ever bite?" "Not me. He bit Handler Torres in February." "What was Torres doing when he bit her?" I think she was trying to correct his heel position. He was already stressed from." "She corrected him when he was already stressed," Lena said. "Yes." Lena nodded slowly. She didn't move toward Brutus. She didn't call him, didn't crouch down, didn't extend a hand. She simply turned her body about 15 degrees away from him slightly and let her weight settle back on her heels. And then she waited. 20 seconds passed. Brutus took 1 step forward. Lena didn't react. Her hands stayed at her sides, her gaze unfocused, her breathing visible and even. Another step. The tension in Brutus's shoulders dropped fractionally, but it dropped. Webb was staring. "He never does that." "He's curious," Lena said, keeping her voice low and flat. "He's been working in an environment where his curiosity has been punished. Every time he tries to process something new, he gets corrected back into position before he can finish the thought. Do that to a dog long enough and they stop trying to process. They just react." Brutus took 2 more steps and lowered his nose to within a foot of her boot. Lena let him. She stood completely still. "He's reading you," Webb said quietly. "He's deciding," she corrected. "Whether I'm safe, whether I'm going to do something unpredictable. The answer he's arriving at right now is no, I'm not. Which means the next time you work with him, he's going to remember that not every unknown thing is a threat." Cole watched Brutus complete his assessment, and then, and this was the part he would think about for a long time afterward, sit down. Not on command. Not in response to any signal. He just sat, and the rigidity went out of his frame, and he looked for a moment like a different dog entirely. "He hasn't done that in months," Webb said. He looked up. His eyes were wet at the corners. "He used to do that when he was younger. Just sit." "Yeah." She moved through the floor with the same deliberate patience, spending time with each team, asking questions that were not about the dogs. She asked about handler schedules, rotation frequencies, how often teams were separated overnight, what the correction protocols were for failed exercises, whether handlers had been given any instruction in stress recognition. She wrote in her notebook, not constantly, but with clear purpose, jotting something after each handler conversation, after each observation. Cole walked beside her, saying little. At the 40-minute mark, she stopped in front of Kaiser and his handler, a young woman named Specialist Anna Rourke, who had been with the program for 8 months. Rourke was competent, careful, well-liked. Kaiser had been flagged twice in her tenure for unpredictable behavior during high-stress scenarios. "How does Kaiser do in quiet environments?" Lena asked. Rourke blinked. "He's perfect. In quiet environments, he's a different dog. He anticipates everything, he's responsive. He works ahead of my commands sometimes. And in noisy environments. That's where we lose him. He gets scattered, starts working on his own, ignoring me. Last evaluation, he broke formation entirely." Lena made a note. "Has anyone looked at his auditory sensitivity history?" Rourke looked at Cole. Cole looked at Lena. "What are you asking?" "Kaiser has an auditory processing sensitivity. It's in his intake records from the breeding program, flagged as a monitor item never followed up on. When ambient sound levels exceed a certain threshold, he doesn't get aggressive. He gets overwhelmed. and when he's overwhelmed, and nobody around him understands why he does the only logical thing he can do. He takes himself out of the situation, Rourke said slowly. He removes himself from the source of the overwhelm, which looks like a discipline failure because it is a departure from formation. But it isn't aggression, it isn't instability. It's a dog doing the only self-protective thing available to him in an environment that nobody designed to accommodate his actual neurology. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Nobody told me that." "Nobody knew," Lena said, and her voice carried something that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow. "Or if they did, it didn't make it into a format that reached you. That's a system failure specialist. Not yours, not Kaiser's." Rourke crouched down and put her hand on Kaiser's flank. He leaned into her, and the gesture dog into handler was so purely simple that Cole had to look away for a moment. The 2 hours became 3. Cole didn't stop them. By the time Lena paused at the far end of the floor, the entire climate of the training session had shifted. Handlers were talking to each other, not the usual operational shorthand, but actual conversation about their dogs, about things they'd noticed and never mentioned, because there hadn't been a channel for it. 2 handlers had sat down together during a break and were comparing notes on stress behaviors they'd both been attributing to individual dog temperament. Cole approached her while she was reviewing her notebook. "You've been here 3 hours." "I know. You've talked to every handler." "Yes. And you haven't touched a single dog." She looked up. "I touched Brutus." "Your boot touched Brutus's nose. He initiated that." A small, brief something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. "That's the point, Commander." Cole was quiet for a moment. He was rearranging things in his mind. Information he thought he had understood, conclusions he thought were settled. The 3 dogs on the euthanasia recommendation list. Shadow Ranger and Delta. You know their names. I did my homework before I came. They've been cleared by 2 independent evaluators, who spent 45 minutes each with them in controlled intake environments, Lena said. Not on this floor, not with their handlers, not in the conditions that trigger the behaviors they're being evaluated for. The evaluators saw the file. I need you to understand what I'm telling you. Those dogs are not dangerous. They are suffering. And the difference matters enormously because one of those conditions is treatable. Cole looked at her for a long time. Outside through the windows, he could see his teams, his dogs, his handlers, moving through the rest of the afternoon with something different in their posture than they'd had at 8 o'clock this morning. He wasn't sure yet what to call it. Less performance, more presence. 3 days, he said finally. Lena closed her notebook. 3 days, he repeated. Full floor access. I'll have someone pull every record you want. You'll report to me every evening before you leave. He paused. And you'll tell me at some point the real reason you came here. She held his gaze. I will, she said, when you're ready to hear it. Cole nodded once, turned, and walked back across the floor. Behind him, he heard her open her notebook again, and the sound of her pen moving across the page, steady and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. As if she had known before she ever set foot inside exactly what she was going to find. As if Blackridge had been on her list for a very long time, and she had only now decided it was time to come. The question Cole couldn't shake. Not that afternoon, not that evening, not in the hour before dawn, when he lay awake, running through everything she'd said, was not who she was. It was how she had known, because some of what she'd described, the auditory sensitivity, the stress markers, the psychological profile of each dog, was not in any report he had seen. Some of it was not in any report at all, which meant either she had access to information that existed outside official channels, or she had seen this before, exactly this, at another facility, with the same outcomes. And if that was true, then the question was not what was wrong with Blackridge. The question was who had made it this way, and whether they had done it on purpose. He didn't sleep that night, not really. Cole sat at his desk until 2 in the morning, pulling files he hadn't looked at in months. Handler incident reports, veterinary assessments, training logs, operational readiness evaluations. He read them differently now, with Lena's words running underneath every line like a second text. 4 dogs washed out. 2 hospitalizations. 3 animals on the euthanasia list. He had signed off on every single one of those outcomes, and at the time, each one had seemed like the only logical conclusion. Handler error. Temperament instability. Unpredictable aggression. The language was clean and clinical, and it had never once asked why. He closed the last file at 2:14 and sat in the dark for a long time. At 6:15 the next morning, Lena Cross was already on the floor. She hadn't asked for early access. She hadn't asked for anything. She had simply arrived before the first handler rotation, and when the overnight security officer called Cole's office to ask what to do, Cole said, "Let her in," and hung up. He was there himself by 6:40, coffee in hand, and she was already moving through the kennels at the back of the facility, notebook open, pen working. "You're early," he said. "You're late," she replied without looking up. Shadow had a stress episode at approximately 5:40 this morning. "I want to know who was on kennel duty and what the noise level was in the adjacent bay." Cole stopped. "How do you know about a 5:40 incident? I haven't been briefed." "Because I was here." She turned a page. "Your overnight kennel officer specialist Tran handled it correctly. Isolated. Shadow reduced stimulation, stayed calm. The episode resolved in about 11 minutes. But it happened because the generator for Bay C cycled on at 5:38, and the acoustic bleed into Shadow's kennel exceeded what he can currently tolerate." Cole stared at her. "You were here at 5:40 in the morning." "I was here at 5, she said simply. "I wanted to see what the facility sounds like before people arrive. That's Ms. Cross. That is not within the parameters of what I agreed to." She finally looked at him. "Are you going to waste the next 10 minutes arguing about parameters, or are you going to listen to what I'm about to tell you?" He drank his coffee. "Talk." She walked him through what she had observed in the early morning. Not just Shadow's episode, but the entire acoustic and environmental profile of the facility before the day shift began. The generator cycles, the ventilation timing, the noise bleed between bays. She had mapped it in her notebook with a precision that made Cole's jaw tighten, because it was exactly the kind of environmental assessment that should have been done when the facility was built, and clearly never had been. "The dogs spend 8 to 10 hours a night in those kennels," Lena said. "The environmental stressors they're absorbing during those hours are compounding the stress they carry into training every morning. You're running high-intensity work with animals who are starting each day already depleted. Our kennels meet every standard. Your kennels meet the minimum standard for animal housing," she said. "That's not the same thing as an optimal recovery environment for working military animals. There's a gap between those two things, and your dogs are living in that gap." Cole was quiet. He hated that she was right. He hated it specifically because it was the kind of thing that felt obvious once someone said it out loud, and he should have seen it years ago. "What do you need from me this morning?" he asked. She almost smiled. "Access to your handler files, personnel records, specifically training history, any prior K9 experience before Blackridge, and any documented incidents during the first 90 days of each handler-dog pairing." "That's sensitive personnel material." "I know." She met his eyes. "And I need it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and led her to the records room. Sergeant First Class Dale Pruitt found them there an hour later and stood in the doorway with an expression that moved through several stages, surprise, calculation, and something that landed in the neighborhood of concern before he settled on professional neutrality. "Commander, Ms. Cross." He nodded at both of them. "Early start." "Pruitt." Cole didn't look up from the file he was reading. "Pull the 90-day pairing assessments for Ghost Team 7. All of them." Pruitt didn't move immediately. "Those are—" "I know what they are. Pull them." A beat of silence. Pruitt pulled them. Lena watched the exchange without comment, but Cole noticed she made a small notation in her book after Pruitt left the room. He didn't ask her about it. He was starting to understand that her notebook was a conversation he would have to earn access to. The Ghost Team. 7 files told a story that Cole had not been reading correctly. Ghost Team 7 was the facility's flagship unit, 4 handler dog pairs, priority assignments, the highest training budget, the most experienced dogs. They had also failed their last 2 operational readiness evaluations, and both failures had been attributed in the official reports to environmental factors and handler adjustment periods. Cole had accepted those explanations because the alternative that his best unit was genuinely in trouble was not something he'd had room for. Lena read through the files without speaking. Cole read alongside her, and the picture that assembled itself was not complicated once you knew what to look for. 3 of the 4 Ghost Team handlers had been rotated in within 14 months. 2 of them had come from programs with fundamentally different training philosophies, reward-based systems, lighter correction protocols, more handler autonomy. When they arrived at Blackridge, they had been integrated into the existing command structure without any transition support. The result played out across 14 months of daily training logs was a slow grinding erosion of handler-dog communication. The handlers had been trying to speak one language. The dogs had been trained in another. And nobody in the command chain had identified the mismatch, because the metrics they were measuring, compliance rates, command response times, obstacle completion, didn't capture the deterioration happening underneath. Who made the rotation decisions? Lena asked. Cole looked at the authorization signatures on the transfer orders. He didn't answer immediately. Commander, Major Gerald Staves, he said. Regional K9 Oversight. He manages personnel allocation across 4 facilities. Lena was still. Staves made 3 handler rotations in 14 months to a single unit. Yes. And the prior unit, Ghost Team 7, before the rotations. What was their evaluation record? Cole pulled the older files. He already knew the answer, had known it as he reached for the folder, and something cold settled in his chest as he confirmed it. Prior to the first rotation, Ghost Team 7 had been evaluated as operationally excellent for 6 consecutive quarters. 6 quarters, Lena said quietly. Yes. And then 3 rotations in 14 months and 2 consecutive failures. Yes. She closed the file. Her hands were flat on the table, and she was looking at the wall. Not at him, and Cole could see something working behind her expression. Not anger, but the controlled, precise movement of someone putting pieces in exactly the right places. Tell me about Staves, she said. He's been in regional oversight for 4 years. Strong operational record before that. Well regarded. Cole paused. I've had some friction with him over resource allocation. It's not unusual at this level. What kind of friction? He's pushed for consolidation, efficiency measures, reducing the number of active K9 teams across the region, centralizing training under a unified protocol. Cole said it carefully because he was only now hearing how it sounded. Lena turned and looked at him. A unified protocol he controls. Cole said nothing. If Ghost Team 7 fails a 3rd evaluation, Lena said, what happens to the unit? The answer sat in Cole's throat for a moment before he could get it out. It gets dissolved, dogs redistributed or retired, handlers reassigned. And Blackridge loses its flagship unit. Yes. Which affects the facility's operational rating. Significantly. Which could support a case for consolidation. Cole put both hands flat on the table and looked at the files spread between them. The room was very quiet. Outside in the corridor, he could hear Pruitt's footsteps retreating toward the main floor and the distant sound of the morning handler rotation beginning, dogs and voices, and the sharp, clean sound of the facility coming to life. That's a serious implication, he said. I know it is. Lena's voice was level. I'm not making an accusation. I'm describing a pattern. Patterns aren't proof, but they're a reason to look more carefully. She paused. Has Staves visited the facility recently? He's scheduled for an inspection in 9 days. She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she had already suspected, and Cole felt the cold thing in his chest spread outward. 9 days, he said. 9 days, she repeated. We need to move faster than I planned. Jafim. That morning on the floor was different from the day before, more structured, more urgent. Lena worked with each ghost team handler individually, and she worked with them the way a surgeon works, precise, no wasted motion, no sentiment that wasn't earned. Handler. First class Jamie Okafor had been at Blackridge for 11 months. He'd come from a program in Virginia that used positive reinforcement as its primary training mechanism. And he was good, genuinely skilled with the kind of natural attunement to animal behavior that couldn't be fully taught. His dog was a 5-year-old German Shepherd named Diesel, who had been trained under Blackridge's correction-heavy system from the start. They were, Lena said, speaking different languages. Show me your check-in sequence, she told Okafor. What you do before a training session, starting from the moment you reach Diesel's kennel. Okafor walked her through it. Cole watched and saw nothing obviously wrong. It was a competent professional sequence consistent with protocol. Lena let him finish. Then she said, What does Diesel do when you first open the kennel door? Okafor thought about it. He stands, waits for a command. Does he always stand immediately, or does he sometimes have to shift his weight first? Okafor blinked. He'll be lying down and he kind of repositions, pushes up. How long has he been doing that? Maybe 4 or 5 months. That's a pain response, Lena said. Diesel has hip dysplasia developing in his left hip. It's been developing for probably 6 months. Every morning when you bring him out, he's working through discomfort before the session even starts. By the time you hit your 3rd drill rotation, he's in real pain, and that's when his performance drops. Okafor went completely still. His last vet check was standard intake exam. They weren't looking for early dysplasia markers in a 5-year-old because the expectation is that 5-year-olds don't present yet. Diesel's presenting early. She paused. He hasn't failed those drills because of the language gap between you. He's failed because he's hurting, and he has no way to tell you. The silence that followed was the kind that changes something permanently. Okafor crouched down and put his hand on Diesel's back carefully, with a new quality of attention that Cole recognized as the moment a person stops performing care and starts actually feeling it. Diesel turned and pressed his nose briefly against Okafor's wrist. It was a small thing. It mattered enormously. I need to get him to the vet today, Okafor said. Yes, Lena said. You do. Cole pulled out his radio and made the call before Okafor had finished speaking. By early afternoon, Lena had worked through all 4 ghost team pairs. Each session had produced something: a misidentified behavior, a masked physical issue, a communication breakdown that had been mislabeled as temperament failure. None of it was catastrophic on its own. Stacked together, it was the precise architecture of a unit being quietly dismantled from the inside, and the dismantling had been happening slowly enough that nobody in the building had seen the shape of it. Until now. Cole found her at the far end of the floor during the midday break, standing alone, notebook open, writing quickly. He had been working out how to say what he needed to say for the last hour, and he had not found a clean way to do it, so he simply said it. Last night I went through the files from the 3 facilities that lost K9 programs in the last 2 years, consolidated under regional oversight. I was looking at the timeline. Lena kept writing. All 3 had inspection failures within 12 months of personnel rotations authorized by major staves. She stopped writing. All 3 had animals flagged for behavioral issues that led to program-level evaluations. All 3 were dissolved within 18 months of the first rotation. He paused. This isn't a pattern at Blackridge. This is a pattern. Lena closed her notebook. She turned and faced him, and what he saw in her face was not the reaction he expected. Not surprise, not vindication. What he saw was grief. Clear, contained, exhausted grief. I know, she said. Cole stared at her. You knew before you came here. I suspected, she said. I needed to see it for myself. I needed documentation. She held up the notebook. 3 days of direct observation handler testimony file cross-reference. What I have in here combined with the records you've been pulling for me, that's not an allegation. That's a case. "You came here to build a case. I came here because the dogs were suffering," she said, and her voice had an edge to it for the first time. Not anger at him, but something fiercer and more private. "That's the truth. The dogs were suffering, and 3 of them were going to be killed for behaviors that are treatable. That was the reason I walked through your gate. Everything else," she glanced at the notebook, "is what I found when I got here." Cole absorbed that. He let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke again. "Who else knows what you know? Right now, you and me. And in 9 days, Staves walks through my door for an inspection." "Yes. And if Ghost Team 7 fails a 3rd evaluation under his observation, he'll have everything he needs to begin dissolution proceedings," Lena said. "The recommendation will go up the chain within a week. Blackridge loses flagship status, loses budget allocation, and within 6 months, the consolidation proposal gets approved." She met his eyes. "He's done it 3 times. He knows exactly how long each step takes." Cole looked at his facility, his dogs, his handlers, the program he had built and run for 6 years. Then, he looked at Lena Cross, who had walked through his gate 27 hours ago, with nothing but a notebook and a level of knowledge that still didn't fully make sense. "Tell me who you really are," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her notebook to the first page and held it out to him. At the top, in small, clean handwriting, was a name he recognized. Not Lena Cross. A different name. A name attached to a case that had gone through DOD internal review 18 months ago. A whistleblower case involving a regional K9 program administrator who had been quietly dismantling military working dog units across 2 commands. The case had been closed. Insufficient evidence. The administrator had been transferred, not sanctioned. Cole looked up slowly. "You filed that case. I built that case," she said. "They closed it anyway." She took the notebook back. "I wasn't finished." And just like that, everything Cole thought he understood about why she was here collapsed into something sharper and more dangerous, and he understood with sudden total clarity that Lena Cross had not come to Blackridge to help him. She had come to finish what they had taken from her 18 months ago, and she was going to need him to do it. Cole didn't sleep the second night either. He sat with the name in Lena's notebook turning over in his mind like a stone in a current, wearing down every assumption he'd built about who she was and what she wanted. She had filed a federal whistleblower case 18 months ago. She had documented a pattern of deliberate program destruction across 2 commands. She had built a case substantial enough to reach DOD internal review, and someone somewhere in that chain had decided it wasn't enough, or had decided it was too much. Those were 2 very different things, and the difference kept Cole awake until 4 in the morning. He was back on the floor by 6. Lena was already there. He was starting to think she didn't sleep at all. "I need to ask you something," he said, falling into step beside her. "Ask." "The case 18 months ago, you had documentation facility records, personnel files, evaluation data, the same kind of material you've been collecting here." "Yes. And they closed it anyway." He paused. "What was missing?" She walked 3 more steps before she answered. "A witness. Someone inside the command structure who had direct knowledge of Staves giving instructions, not just making decisions that could be explained away as policy, but actively directing outcomes. Telling someone to classify a dog's behavior in a specific way. Telling someone to schedule an evaluation under specific conditions designed to produce failure." She stopped. "I had the pattern. I didn't have the person who could confirm the pattern was intentional." Cole looked at her. "And you think that person is here?" "I think that person has been here for a while," she said. "And I think they've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions." Cole thought about Pruitt. About the slight hesitation when he'd been asked to pull the Ghost Team files. About the notation Lena had made in her book after watching that exchange. "Pruitt," he said. Lena didn't confirm it and didn't deny it. "I need to work with Shadow this morning. Can you make sure we're not interrupted?" He understood that the conversation was over, and he let it end. Shadow was a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois who had been on the euthanasia recommendation list for 6 weeks. His file described him as unpredictably reactive, potentially dangerous, a liability to handlers and other animals. His assigned handler, Corporal Leo Marsh, was 24 years old, 9 months into his first K9 assignment, and visibly terrified of his own dog. That was the first thing Lena said to Marsh straight and without softening when they stood together outside Shadow's kennel. "You're afraid of him." Marsh's jaw tightened. "I respect his capabilities. That's not what I said." Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was completely without cushion. "You're afraid. It's in your body when you approach him. He knows it. He's known it since the first week you were paired, and it has been the central fact of your relationship with him for 9 months. She paused. "I'm not criticizing you. Fear is rational here. Shadow is large, he's fast, and he has hurt people. I'm telling you because you need to understand what he's been experiencing. He has been paired with a handler who is afraid of him for 9 months. What do you think that does to a dog who is trying to figure out whether his handler is safe?" Marsh didn't answer. His throat worked. "He can't trust you," Lena said. "Not because you're a bad handler, your technical skills are fine. But trust is not a technical skill. Shadow has been living in a relationship where the person responsible for him is frightened of him, and that fear reads to him as instability, as unpredictability. The reactive behavior you've been documenting. He's not being aggressive. He's trying to manage an environment that feels fundamentally unsafe because the anchor point of that environment is signaling danger." Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he said in a voice that had shed most of its professional coating, "I asked to be reassigned 3 months ago." Cole, standing 6 feet back, went still. "I put in a formal request," Marsh continued. "I said I didn't think the pairing was working, and I wanted to be evaluated for a different assignment." He looked at Cole. The request came back denied. Reason given was operational continuity. Cole kept his face controlled. "I didn't see that request. It went through Sergeant Pruitt's desk." Marsh said it without accusation, just the flat delivery of someone stating a fact they'd been carrying alone for a long time. "He told me it had been reviewed and denied at the facility level, that I needed to work through the challenges with Shadow because reassignment wasn't available." The silence that followed had a particular texture, the texture of something that had been hidden, finally becoming visible in full daylight. Cole turned and found Lena watching him. She wasn't writing in her notebook. She was simply watching with those gray eyes that missed nothing. And he understood that she had known this was coming. She had known before she walked up to Marsh this morning exactly what he would say. She had built the approach to this conversation deliberately, and the confirmation that arrived at the end of it was not a surprise to her. It was evidence. "Marsh," Cole said, "I want a written statement from you, today. What you just told me with dates and the specific language from the denial." Marsh nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked at Shadow's kennel. "What about him?" "He's not going anywhere," Lena said. "Work with me this morning. Don't try to command him. Don't try to manage him. I want you to just be near him, nothing else." "That's it." "That's everything," she said. "For right now, that's the whole job." Tikan. What happened over the next 90 minutes with Shadow was not dramatic in the way Cole had expected drama to look. It was quiet and slow and required a quality of patience that he was not sure he personally possessed. Lena guided Marsh through a series of interactions so minimal they barely qualified as interactions: proximity without pressure, presence without demand. She coached his breathing, his posture, the direction of his gaze, the speed of his movements. She did it in a low, steady voice that was itself a kind of instruction in how to be calm when you were not calm. Shadow watched all of it from across the kennel with the wariness of an animal that had learned to expect unpredictability. He didn't approach. He didn't retreat. He watched. 30 minutes in, Lena said to Marsh, "Sit down on the floor." "Ma'am?" "Sit down. Don't look at him. Just sit." Marsh sat. His discomfort was obvious, and he managed it, which was itself a significant achievement. 3 minutes passed. 5. Shadow shifted his weight and then, with the careful deliberation of an animal making a calculated decision, crossed half the distance between them and stopped. Cole was watching Marsh's face. He saw the moment the young handler understood what was happening, not intellectually, but in his body, the small, genuine shock of a dog choosing freely to move toward him. Lena said nothing. She let the moment exist. At the 11-minute mark, Shadow crossed the remaining distance and put his nose against Marsh's knee. Marsh didn't move. His eyes were bright, and his jaw was locked against whatever was happening in his chest, and he held absolutely still while Shadow completed his assessment, and then, with the same deliberate calm, lay down 2 feet away. "He chose," Marsh said. His voice was rough. "He chose," Lena confirmed. "That's the foundation. Everything else gets built on that." Cole turned away and walked to the far wall, and stood there for a moment with his arms crossed, looking at nothing, because something was happening in his own chest that had no place in the professional architecture of who he was supposed to be in this building. A dog that had been slated for death had just chosen to lie down next to the man he'd been told was afraid of him. And the reason it had happened was that one person had walked into this facility and asked the right questions. By mid-morning, Cole had done 3 things. He had pulled every handler reassignment request from the last 14 months. He had cross-referenced them against Pruitt's authorization logs. And he had found 4 additional requests. 4 handlers asking to be evaluated for different pairings, for reasons that ranged from communication breakdown to safety concerns, all of which had been logged as received, none of which had reached Cole's desk. He sat with those 4 files and understood what he was looking at. Pruitt wasn't a passive participant. He had been actively managing the flow of information through Cole's command, deciding what reached the commander and what didn't. The reassignment requests. Possibly the evaluation scheduling. Possibly the classification of behavioral incidents in ways that served a particular outcome. He had been in place for 2 years, embedded deep enough in the administrative structure that his interventions were nearly invisible. Cole called Pruitt into his office at 10:30. Pruitt came in, the way he always came in, organized professional, carrying his clipboard like a shield. He sat in the chair across the desk and waited with the patience of a man who had learned to wait out many conversations. "Tell me about the handler reassignment requests," Cole said. Pruitt's expression didn't change. "Which ones, sir?" "All of them. The ones that came through your desk in the last 14 months and didn't reach mine." A pause, very brief. "I reviewed each request against operational requirements and determined that reassignment wasn't supportable at the facility level. That's within my administrative authority." "Your authority is to flag requests for my review, Pruitt, not to make final determinations on them." "There's some ambiguity in the protocol." "There is no ambiguity." Cole's voice was flat. 4 handlers submitted safety-related reassignment requests. None of them reached me. Marsh has been paired with a dog on the euthanasia list for 9 months because you told him his request was denied at the facility level. That dog is scheduled to be killed, Pruitt. A 24-year-old handler has been living with a potentially dangerous animal and documented fear because you intercepted his paperwork. Pruitt set his clipboard on his knee very carefully. "Commander, with respect, the pairing decisions were made to maintain unit stability during a critical evaluation period." "Who told you that?" Cole said. "Who defined that evaluation period and what it required?" Silence. "Was it Staves?" Pruitt's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did a fractional shift, the smallest possible acknowledgement that the name had landed where Cole intended it. "I'd like to have legal counsel present before continuing this conversation," Pruitt said. Cole looked at him for a long time. "That's your right," he said quietly. "And that's also your answer." He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the base legal officer. The second was to a number Lena had given him that morning, a contact at the DOD Inspector General's office, who she had told him had been waiting for exactly this kind of call for approximately 18 months. Lena was with Atlas when Cole found her at noon. Atlas was the German shepherd, who had required a specialized muzzle during transport, the dog whose file described him as having unpredictable resource-guarding behavior with potential for serious handler injury. Handler Staff Sergeant Priya Navarro had worked with Atlas for 6 months and had submitted no complaints, no incident reports, and no reassignment requests. She had simply managed quietly and alone a dog who was in the late stages of a response pattern that had been built brick by inconsistent reinforcement and repeated punishment for behaviors that were, Lena had identified, expressions of anxiety rather than aggression. Atlas was not guarding resources. Atlas was guarding himself. "He's never actually bitten anyone," Navarro was saying as Cole approached. She had the careful voice of someone who had been holding this information alone for a long time and was only now being given permission to say it. "Every time he's been documented as nearly biting. I was there. He gave a warning. He gave multiple warnings. The handler reaching for whatever he had near him ignored the warnings, and then Atlas escalated, and the escalation got documented as unpredictable aggression. Because the warnings weren't recognized as warnings," Lena said. "Because nobody trained us to recognize them," Navarro said, and there was something in her voice, not bitterness exactly, but the weight of a person who has been doing their best inside a system that gave them insufficient tools and then blamed them for the gaps. Lena looked up and saw Cole. She read his face in about 2 seconds. "You talked to Pruitt." He lawyered up. She nodded, unsurprised. "The IG contact. Called. They're moving." Something shifted in Lena's posture, not relaxation, but recalibration, the adjustment of a person who has been operating at maximum tension and can now distribute the load slightly. "How long do we have before Staves knows something is happening?" "I don't know," Cole said honestly. "Pruitt may contact him. I have to assume that's possible." "Then we need everything documented before the inspection." She looked at her notebook. "I have enough for Shadow, Kaiser, and Diesel. I need one more full session with Brutus, and I need the complete veterinary history on all 3 animals on the euthanasia list, cross-referenced against the incident reports. I'll have it pulled this afternoon." "Cole." She said his name without rank for the first time, and the absence of the title made the sentence land differently. "If Staves comes early, if Pruitt contacts him, and he moves the inspection up, we may not have 9 days." "I know." "Are you ready for that?" He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at Lena, and at Navarro, and at Atlas, who was sitting quietly beside his handler with none of the tension his file described, because for the first time in 6 months, someone had correctly identified what he was feeling and responded to it without punishment. "Yeah," Cole said. "I'm ready." He wasn't entirely sure that was true. But he said it anyway because Lena Cross had walked into his facility 3 days ago and shown him the difference between what he'd built and what he'd thought he'd built, and there was only one direction to go from that understanding. Forward, regardless of what was coming through his gate. He turned and walked back toward his office, pulling out his phone, already composing the next call in his head. Behind him he could hear Navarro say something quietly to Atlas, and the sound of the dog shifting, settling, finding something in the proximity of his handler that he had apparently been looking for a very long time. It sounded at a distance like relief. And then Cole's phone buzzed in his hand with an incoming call from a number he recognized, Major Gerald Staves, and Cole stopped walking and looked at the screen for 3 full seconds before he answered it, and his voice when he spoke was completely steady. "Staves. Cole." The voice on the other end was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who believed himself to be in control of the situation. "I wanted to let you know I'm moving the inspection up. I'll be at Blackridge the day after tomorrow." Cole's grip tightened on the phone. 7 days early. Pruitt had already made contact. "We'll be ready," Cole said. He ended the call and stood for a moment in the middle of the corridor working through the math. 2 days. Everything Lena needed to complete, documented, verified, and ready to present. She had 2 days to finish what she'd come here to do. He turned back toward the floor and raised his voice just enough to carry. "Lena." She looked up from across the room. 2 days, he said. She held his gaze for 1 beat. Then she opened her notebook and started writing faster. 2 days was not enough time. Lena knew that before Cole finished saying it. She had built cases before, had spent months assembling documentation that was airtight enough to survive institutional review. And even then, it hadn't been enough. 2 days meant compression, meant prioritization, meant deciding what was essential and letting go of everything else. It meant working with the precision of someone diffusing something, because the margin for error was exactly 0. She worked until 11 that night. Cole stayed with her. They didn't talk much. He pulled files. She read them. She told him what she needed next. He got it. The rhythm of it was the rhythm of 2 people who had stopped performing competence for each other and were simply being competent. And somewhere around hour 4, Cole realized that he trusted her. Not because he'd decided to, but because trust had assembled itself out of everything he'd watched her do over the past 3 days and hadn't asked his permission. At 11:15, she closed the last file and sat back in her chair and pressed her hands flat against the table and breathed. "Tell me what we have," Cole said. She walked him through it. Handler testimony from 6 individuals, each documenting specific incidents where administrative decisions had directly obstructed handler dog welfare. Veterinary cross-references, confirming that 3 animals on the euthanasia list had treatable conditions that had never been properly investigated. Pruitt's authorization logs showing systematic interception of reassignment requests over 14 months. The Ghost Team personnel rotation records against Staves's authorization signatures. The evaluation scheduling data showing that both failed assessments had been conducted under conditions that deviated from standard protocol, in ways that consistently disadvantaged the unit being evaluated. Cole listened to all of it and said nothing until she stopped. "Is it enough?" he asked. "It's more than I had 18 months ago," she said. "Whether it's enough depends on who's sitting across the table when it gets presented." The IG contact. His name is Warren. He's been building a parallel file on Staves for 11 months. What we have here fills gaps he couldn't close from the outside. She paused. When Warren sees what Pruitt's logs show about the reassignment requests, combined with the evaluation scheduling data, he'll have the intentionality evidence he needs. That's what killed the case last time. I had the pattern. He has the pattern. Neither of us had proof of intent. This is the proof. Cole was quiet for a moment. "And Staves walks in day after tomorrow." "Which we can use," Lena said, and something sharpened in her voice. "He's coming here expecting a facility in the late stages of documented failure. He expects to find handler relationships, broken down dogs performing poorly, a commander who has been managing the optics of decline. He doesn't know that the last 3 days happened." Cole looked at her. "You want to show him? I want to demonstrate in front of a federal inspector that the failures attributed to this program are not operational failures. They are the result of specific administrative interventions, and that when those interventions are identified and corrected, the program functions." She met his eyes. "Brutus Atlas Shadow, the Ghost Team. In 2 days, I need those teams performing at a level that cannot be explained by the documentation in Staves's file. Because his entire case for dissolution rests on the conclusion that this program is irreparably compromised. If we can show Liv in front of him that it isn't, and we can show simultaneously that the paper trail contradicts his narrative, then he walks into that inspection as the story, not the inspector." The room was very quiet. "That's a significant gamble," Cole said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." "If the dogs don't perform, they'll perform," she said, and there was no performance in the way she said it. Just the flat certainty of someone who has spent 30 days studying something and knows exactly what it can do. They've been performing for years inside a system that was working against them. Give them 2 days inside a system that isn't, and they'll show you who they've always been. Cole looked at the files spread across the table. Then he looked at Lena Cross, who had walked into his facility with a notebook and a history and a case that had been shut down once and had simply come back and started over. "All right," he said. "What do you need?" The next morning arrived with the specific quality of time that has been compressed every hour, carrying the weight of 3. Lena was on the floor before the day shift, running through what she needed with each handler in the brief, exact language of someone with no margin for repetition. She had a sequence. Every session was mapped. Every handler knew what they were being asked to demonstrate and why. Marsh was first. Shadow. The transformation in that pairing over 4 days was the kind of thing that made experienced handlers stop what they were doing and simply watch. Shadow moved with Marsh now, not mechanically, not in the tight controlled compliance of an animal operating under threat, but with the fluid attention of a dog who has decided his handler is worth following. The trembling that had been documented every morning for 3 months was gone. Marsh's posture had changed. He was still learning, still uncertain in specific moments, but the fear that had been broadcasting through every inch of his body had quieted to something manageable, and Shadow felt it and responded to it. "Run the obstacle sequence," Lena told Marsh. "Don't correct. If he misses something, let it go and keep moving. I want to see what he does when the pressure's off." Marsh ran the sequence. Shadow hit every obstacle, not perfectly, not with the mechanical precision of a dog drilling under heavy correction, but with the engaged problem-solving energy of an animal who is genuinely working with his handler rather than in spite of him. On the 4th obstacle, he overshot the landing and adjusted mid-stride fast and clean, and Marsh laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him, and said, "Good boy!" And the words sounded like they came from somewhere new. Handler Okafor and Diesel were next. Diesel had been seen by the base veterinarian the prior afternoon, and the preliminary assessment confirmed early-stage hip dysplasia in the left hip, consistent with everything Lena had identified from behavioral observation alone. The vet had been quiet for a long moment after hearing how the diagnosis had been made, and then had said, with the controlled embarrassment of a professional acknowledging a miss, that he would have a full treatment protocol ready within 24 hours. Diesel was on anti-inflammatory support for the first time, and the difference in his movement was visible from across the floor. He was lighter. Okafor noticed it within 30 seconds and stopped walking, and just stood there watching his dog move, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone seeing something they had been afraid to hope for. "He's not compensating," Okafor said. "He's not hurting," Lena said. "He's been hurting this whole time, and I didn't—" Okafor stopped. "You didn't know," Lena said. "Now you do. Work with that." They worked with it. The session that followed was the best Okafor and Diesel had produced in 8 months, and Cole watched it from the side of the floor and added it to the internal accounting he'd been running everything Lena had identified in 72 hours that the entire facility had missed across years of daily contact. He was not a man who processed institutional failure easily, and what he was feeling was something that didn't have a clean name. It lived in the space between anger at the system and grief for what had been lost inside it. He pushed it down and kept moving. Brutus was the hardest session of the day, and not because of the dog. Handler Marcus Webb had been with Brutus for 16 months. He was skilled, committed, and had built a genuine relationship with a dog that most of the facility had given up on. The problem Lena identified that morning was not in Webb's technique. It was in what had been done to Brutus before Webb arrived. "Pull his intake records," she told Cole during a break between sessions. "Everything from the breeding program and the initial placement facility, not the summary, the original documentation." Cole pulled them. It took 40 minutes to locate the originals through the digital archive, and when Lena read them, she went very still. "What is it?" Cole asked. She handed him 2 pages. Brutus was placed at a prior facility before Blackridge. He was there for 7 months. She pointed to a line in the intake notes. The prior facility reported him as corrective non-responsive and recommended evaluation for program exit. He was transferred here instead. Cole read the line. Then he read the correction log from the prior facility. Then he put the papers down carefully and said, "They were using aversive methods, extended duration. Past the point of any legitimate training application," Lena said. Her voice was level, but her jaw was tight. What Brutus went through in those 7 months is the origin point of every behavior that's been documented here as aggression. He's not an aggressive dog. He's a dog who learned through extended experience that humans with authority are unpredictable and dangerous. She paused. Webb has spent 16 months building something on top of that foundation without knowing the foundation was damaged. And he's built something real. The relationship they have is genuine. But Brutus has limits built into him from before he ever arrived here. And those limits are being misread as current instability. Cole thought about the steel cable, about the 2 handlers hospitalized. Is he safe? With Webb, yes. In low-stress environments, with clear communication, yes. In high-stress operational deployments, with unpredictable variables. She stopped. He shouldn't be on a combat deployment list. He should be in a training or detection role that uses his skills without triggering his trauma history. That's not what his assignment profile says. I know. Her voice was very flat. Because the assignment profile was written to justify keeping a difficult-to-manage dog in a high-status deployment role which looks better on program metrics than retiring him to a support function. The metric matters more than the dog. Cole picked up the file and carried it to his desk and sat down heavily. He had been carrying for 3 days the accumulating weight of what this facility had been doing to animals. In his name, not maliciously, not deliberately, but through the specific institutional failure of prioritizing the appearance of performance over the reality of what performance requires. He had believed he was running a well-functioning program. He had signed documents and approved protocols and managed evaluations, and underneath all of it, 36 dogs had been living with the consequences of a system that understood obedience and called it health. He picked up his phone and called the base veterinarian. I need a full behavioral history review on Brutus' complete intake documentation from prior placements included, and I need a recommendation on assignment profile modification, today if possible. Then he walked back out to the floor and told Webb everything. Webb listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, Webb was quiet for a moment, and then he crouched down next to Brutus and put his hand on the dog's neck and stayed there. 7 months, Webb said, before he came here. And nobody told me. It wasn't in the summary documentation. It should have been. Webb looked up. His face had the particular expression of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a relationship, not losing it, but seeing it more fully. He's been working through that this whole time. Every session, every correction. He's been carrying that and still... He stopped. His hand moved on Brutus's neck. He still tries. He trusts you, Lena said from behind them. Neither of them had heard her approach. What you built with him in 16 months is real Webb. It's exactly why he's still here and not on that list. The relationship you created gave him enough stability to function. I need you to understand that you did something genuinely hard without the information you needed, and you did it well enough that this dog is still in this building. Webb stood up. He straightened his shoulders. What do you need from us tomorrow? Detection sequence, Lena said. His strongest domain. I want Staves to see what Brutus does when he's working in his best function. She paused. Can you run a clean detection sequence with him? I can run it in my sleep, Webb said quietly. Good, she said, because tomorrow, that's exactly what I need. The afternoon brought the thing Cole had been anticipating with the specific dread of someone who knows a confrontation is necessary and has not yet determined how it will go. Pruitt had been formally suspended from duty pending the legal review. His replacement for the interim period was a young staff sergeant named Kim, who was efficient and straightforward and had none of Pruitt's embedded complications. The administrative functioning of the facility continued without disruption, which told Cole something important about how much of what Pruitt had been doing was actual administrative work, and how much of it had been information management. But Pruitt had not left quietly. At 3:15, Cole received a call from the base commander's office. Colonel Adrian Hayes, who oversaw Blackridge along with 4 other specialized units on the installation, wanted to see him immediately. Hayes was a compact woman in her mid-50s with a record that Cole respected and a political antenna that was by general consensus the most finely calibrated on the installation. She had not built a 30-year career by missing signals. She had also not built it by making premature moves. Cole sat across from her and gave her everything: Lena, the documentation; Pruitt, the IG. Contact Staves, the inspection. He laid it out in sequence factually without editorializing. Hayes listened without interrupting, which was itself a significant indicator. Hayes almost always interrupted. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "This Cross woman," she said. "She's the one who filed the prior case." "Yes, ma'am." "And she came here independently. No official authority." "Correct." "And in 4 days, she identified what your entire command structure missed across multiple years." Cole held very still. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes looked at him with the direct, measuring gaze of someone who has had this particular conversation. The conversation where a commander has to account for what happened on his watch many times. "I'm not here to add to your difficulty, Cole. I'm here because Pruitt called my office 40 minutes ago and characterized the situation as a civilian operative with unclear motives, interfering with facility operations, and influencing personnel against the command structure." "That's not." "I know what it's not," Hayes said sharply. "I just told you I read signals. I'm telling you what's in play so you walk back out that door prepared." She paused. "Staves is going to arrive tomorrow with a specific narrative. Pruitt just handed him ammunition. Cross's presence here, her prior case, her lack of official credentials, that's all going to be framed as justification for dismissing what she found. The documentation stands regardless of who found it. In a formal review, yes. In the first 20 minutes of an inspection when Staves is controlling the room and defining the terms of discussion." Hayes shook her head. "You need to control the frame before he does. You need to be the one presenting, not responding." Cole leaned forward slightly. "What are you telling me, Colonel?" Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm telling you that I'm going to be present for that inspection. As the installation commander, I have full authority to observe any facility review within my command. And I'm telling you that if what you've just described is accurate, and I believe it is, then what happens in this building tomorrow morning is not just an inspection. It's a reckoning." She paused. "Have your people ready. Have your documentation visible. And have that civilian consultant, official or not, standing where I can see her when it starts." Cole stood. "Yes, ma'am." "Cole." Her voice stopped him at the door. "The dogs on the euthanasia list, where do they stand?" "Shadow has a viable rehabilitation path with handler pairing correction. Diesel has a diagnosed and treatable physical condition. Ranger needs another week of assessment, but early indicators are positive." "And Delta?" He paused. Delta was the one Lena hadn't reached yet. A 3-year-old Malinois who had been in isolation for 6 weeks following a severe incident, who had not had meaningful handler contact since the incident, and who Lena had described that morning as the case she was most worried about. "Delta is tomorrow morning," Cole said. Hayes nodded once. "Then tomorrow morning, don't be late." Cole walked back to the facility with the particular clarity of someone who has moved past the point of wondering whether they made the right choices and is now simply executing on the choices they made. Behind him, the installation hummed with the end-of-day rhythms of a military base, ordinary and steady. Ahead of him, the facility was lit and active. Lena still on the floor, handlers running late sessions, dogs working in the specific quality of focus that had appeared over the last 4 days and had not left. He pushed through this door and found Lena standing in front of Delta's isolation kennel notebook, closed, just looking. "Tell me," Cole said. She didn't turn. "He stopped eating for 3 days after the incident. He's eating again, but he's not sleeping well. His kennel log shows movement patterns consistent with anxiety cycling." She paused. "He's not dangerous. He's grieving." Cole looked at the kennel. Grieving what? His prior handler was reassigned 6 weeks ago, abruptly without transition protocol. Delta had worked with that handler for 2.5 years. Lena's voice had the particular weight of someone saying something that is technically about a dog, and is also about something much larger. They took away the person he trusted most, and put him in isolation and waited for him to stabilize, and his file notes that he hasn't stabilized, and uses that as evidence of temperament instability. But it's grief, Cole said. It's grief, she confirmed. And nobody in this building recognized it as grief because the operational framework here does not have a category for a dog missing someone. Cole stood beside her and looked at Delta and thought about the prior handler. Thought about the rotation, the paperwork, the authorization signature, and the anger that had been building in him for 4 days, reached a new level, and then slowly settled into something colder and more useful. "Can you reach him by morning?" Cole asked. Lena was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to try," she said. "But Cole, what reaches him most tomorrow won't be me." He looked at her. "His prior handler," she said. "Where were they reassigned?" Cole was already reaching for his phone. It was 8:47 in the evening. Staves was arriving in approximately 13 hours. And somewhere on this installation, a handler who had been separated from their dog without explanation or transition was about to get a phone call that would change what happened in that kennel tomorrow morning. Cole dialed. It rang twice. "Specialist Torres," said the voice on the other end. Cole closed his eyes briefly. Torres. The name from Brutus's file, the handler who had been bitten in February. She hadn't been reassigned. She had been transferred to administrative duty. She was still on the installation. "Specialist Torres," Cole said. "This is Commander Cole. I need to ask you about Delta, and I need to ask you about why you were transferred." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Torres said in a voice that had been holding something in for 6 weeks, "Nobody was supposed to ask me about that." And Cole said, "I know. Tell me anyway." Torres arrived at 2200 hours. She came in through the side entrance, still in her administrative duty uniform, and she walked with the careful posture of someone who had been told explicitly or implicitly to make herself small for 6 weeks. Cole met her at the door. Lena was already at Delta's kennel. "Nobody told me why I was transferred," Torres said before Cole could speak. "Pruitt called me in, said there had been a handler dog incident that required administrative review, said I was being temporarily reassigned pending evaluation. That was 6 weeks ago. No evaluation, no follow-up, nothing." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I asked about Delta twice. I was told he was being assessed. I stopped asking because it felt like asking was making things worse." "Who told you that?" Cole asked. "Pruitt." She said the name without inflection. "He said my continued inquiries were being noted in the review file." Cole said nothing for a moment. The specific architecture of what Pruitt had been doing, not just intercepting paperwork, but managing the behavior of individual handlers through the threat of documentation, landed with a new weight. "Delta is at the end of the corridor," Cole said. "Lena Cross is with him. I want you to go to him." Torres blinked. "Now. Right now." She didn't ask any more questions. She walked. Cole followed at a distance and watched what happened when Torres reached the kennel. Lena stepped back without a word, creating space, and Torres stopped in front of the kennel and said, "Delta's name." Just his name quietly, the way you say a name when you've been afraid to say it for weeks, because saying it would make the absence more real. Delta was on his feet before she finished the word. He crossed the kennel in 2 strides and pressed himself against the door, and the sound he made was not a bark and not a whine, but something between the two, the specific vocalization of an animal communicating something that has no cleaner expression than raw relief. Torres put her hand against the door, and he pressed his face into her palm and held it there. Lena stood beside Cole and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The kennel log had documented 6 weeks of anxiety cycling and disrupted sleep and food refusal, and all of it was resolving in real time in front of them, because the thing that had been missing was not a training protocol or a behavioral intervention. It was a person, the right person. "She needs to be with him tonight," Lena said quietly. "I'll authorize it." "And tomorrow, she'll be on the floor," Cole said. "Whatever Staves wants to see tomorrow, he's going to see this." Cole did not sleep. He sat at his desk until 1 in the morning finishing the documentation summary that would go to Warren at the IG's office, cross-referencing every piece of evidence Lena had assembled with the corresponding administrative record. At 1:15, he sent it. At 1:40, his phone showed a read receipt, and 3 minutes later, a message from Warren that said, "Only, I'll be there at 0800. Don't start without me." Cole put his phone down and sat in the silence of his office and let himself feel for exactly 3 minutes everything he had been compressing for 5 days. The anger, the grief, the specific shame of a commander who had believed he was protecting something he had actually been allowing to be dismantled. He felt it fully, and he let it move through him, and then he set it aside because tomorrow required something cleaner than guilt. Tomorrow required precision. He was on the floor at 5:30. Torres was already there inside Delta's kennel, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and Delta across her lap, in the approximate posture of a dog who has located the safest place in his world and has no intention of moving. She looked up when Cole came in, and he saw that she had been crying at some point in the night and had stopped, and her face had the particular quality of someone who has processed something significant and come out the other side with more clarity than they went in with. "How is he?" Cole asked. "He ate," she said. "At about midnight. He just woke up and ate everything in the bowl and went back to sleep." She paused. "He hasn't eaten a full meal in 2 weeks." Cole crouched down. Delta opened one eye, assessed him, and closed it again. "I need to ask you something I should have asked 6 weeks ago. The incident that was used to justify your transfer, what actually happened." Torres was quiet for a moment, organizing something. "There was a training evaluation. Staves was observing he'd come down with Pruitt for a facility walkthrough. Delta and I were running a high-stress scenario. Mid-sequence, one of the evaluation staff moved in a way that Delta read as a threat, fast lateral movement close to me from his blind side. Delta responded. He put himself between me and that person and gave a warning." She paused. "He did exactly what he's trained to do. He protected his handler. Nobody was touched. Nobody was hurt. But Staves documented it as an uncontrolled aggression incident. And 2 days later I was transferred." The room was very still. "Staves was there," Cole said. "He ran the evaluation," Torres said. "He and Pruitt together." Cole stood up slowly. He was rearranging the timeline in his mind, the incident, the transfer, the isolation, the euthanasia recommendation, and the shape of it was not ambiguous. Delta had been functioning correctly, had protected his handler correctly, had demonstrated exactly the bond and responsiveness that made a K9 team effective. And that demonstration in front of Staves had produced not commendation, but the systematic destruction of the team. The handler transferred the dog, isolated the incident documented in a way that would support a euthanasia recommendation. Because a functional bonded team was the opposite of what Staves needed to see at Blackridge. "Torres," Cole said, "I need you to write all of that down. Everything you just told me with dates and the names of everyone present." "I will." She looked at Delta. "And then I'm staying on that floor all morning." "Good," Cole said. "That's exactly where I need you." Warren arrived at 7:58, 2 minutes early, in civilian clothes with a government ID and a leather case, and the specific economy of movement of someone who has been doing consequential work for a long time and has stopped performing it. He shook Cole's hand and Lena's hand and said, "Show me what you have." And they showed him. He read for 40 minutes without speaking. Lena walked him through the key documents, the authorization logs, the evaluation, scheduling data, the handler testimonies, the veterinary cross-references. Torres's statement, which she had completed in handwriting at 5:45 that morning. Warren read Torres's statement twice. "The incident with Delta," he said. "Staves ran that evaluation personally." "Yes," Lena said. "And he documented it as uncontrolled aggression. Protective response," Lena said. "Textbook handler protective behavior. The documentation is a deliberate misclassification." Warren set the statement down. He looked at Lena with an expression that Cole couldn't fully read, something between professional respect and something older and more personal. "The prior case," Warren said. 18 months ago, I was the one who had to tell you it wasn't enough. I know, Lena said. Is this enough? Lena met his eyes. It's everything the prior case was missing. Intent mechanism and a live demonstration that the program functions when the administrative interference is removed. She paused. It's enough. Warren closed his case. Staves arrives at 9. 9 o'clock, Cole confirmed. I'll be in your conference room, Warren said. Not visible until the right moment. You run the inspection on your terms. I'll tell you when the moment is right. Cole nodded. He walked Warren to the conference room, then came back to the floor and stood for a moment looking at his facility. All 36 dogs were in their morning positions. Handlers were moving through the pre-rotation sequence with the changed quality that had been building for 5 days. Less performance, more presence. The floor sounded different than it had 6 days ago. It felt different in the way that spaces feel different when the people inside them have stopped pretending and started working. Lena came to stand beside him. "How are you doing?" she asked. It was the first time she had asked him anything personal, and the question landed with unexpected weight. "I keep thinking about what this place looked like a week ago," Cole said, "and thinking I signed off on it. All of it." "You managed what you could see," she said. "Someone was making sure you couldn't see the right things." "That's not an absolution." "No," she agreed. "It isn't, but it's accurate." She paused. "What you do with it from here, that's where accountability actually lives. Not in the guilt, in the next decision." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you walked through my gate." Lena looked at him, and something in her expression shifted slightly. Not softening exactly, but opening the way a door opens when the person on the other side of it has finally said the right thing. "Let's finish this," she said. Staves arrived at 9:03 in uniform, with an aide and a tablet, and the smooth, organized confidence of a man who believes he controls the outcome of the room he's walking into. He shook Cole's hand with the particular grip of someone establishing hierarchy. He acknowledged Lena with a look that lasted approximately 1 second, and communicated with precision that he had already decided she was irrelevant. That was his first mistake. "I understand you've had some personnel changes this week," Staves said, settling into the chair across from Cole's desk. "Pruitt's suspension, that's significant, Cole. I hope the timing isn't going to compromise our assessment." "The timing is fine," Cole said. "I thought we'd start on the floor if you're ready. I have some things I'd like you to see." Staves glanced at his aide. "Typically, we begin with the documentation review." "I've prepared documentation," Cole said. "I'd like to show you the program first. In operation. I think that context will be useful for the review." A beat of consideration. Staves was a man who liked to set the sequence, and Cole was rearranging it, and the calculation happening behind his eyes was visible for just a moment before the smooth confidence reasserted itself. "Of course," Staves said. "Lead the way." They walked onto the floor, and Staves stopped. The floor was operating at full capacity, all handler dog pairs in active session, moving with the coordinated, purposeful energy of a program that knows what it's doing. Cole watched Staves's eyes move across the room and saw the moment the calculation began, because what Staves was seeing did not match the file he had brought with him. "Ghost Team 7 is in the North Bay," Cole said. "I'd like to start there if that works." They started there. Okafor and Diesel ran the full advanced detection sequence. Precise fluid Diesel, moving with the unguarded energy of a dog whose pain has been addressed and who is working for the first time in months without flinching. Okafor called commands with the quiet confidence of a handler who has been told the truth about his dog and has reorganized everything accordingly. Staves watched without expression. His aide was taking notes. "Diesel was flagged in the last evaluation for performance degradation," Staves said. "Diesel has early-stage hip dysplasia that wasn't identified until this week," Cole said. "He's been working through unaddressed pain for approximately 6 months. The performance degradation tracks exactly with the onset of that condition. He's on treatment now, and his performance reflects it. Staves looked at him. A physical condition that wasn't identified. A physical condition that wasn't looked for, Cole said. Because the behavioral presentation was classified as a training issue rather than a medical one. He paused. I have the veterinary documentation if you'd like to review it. They moved to Marsh and Shadow. Shadow ran a clean recall sequence and then a tracking sequence working with Marsh in the specific unhurried attunement that Lena had built between them over 4 days. Not perfect, not fully polished, but real in a way that performance metrics had never captured and couldn't dismiss. Shadow is on the euthanasia recommendation list, Staves said. Shadow was on the list, Cole said. Based on behavioral documentation that misclassified anxiety responses as aggression. The underlying condition is treatable. The handler pairing that was creating the behavioral issues has been corrected. He let that sit for a moment. I'm withdrawing the recommendation. Something moved through Staves's expression. Not panic, he was too controlled for panic, but a recalculation. He was adjusting the model in real time, trying to find the new shape of the situation. Then Torres and Delta walked onto the floor. Cole had saved them for this moment deliberately. Delta, who had spent 6 weeks in isolation, who had stopped eating, who had been documented as irreparably behaviorally compromised. Delta moved onto that floor beside Torres, with his head up and his attention forward, and the specific grounded presence of a dog who knows exactly where he is and exactly who he's with, and finds both of those things entirely satisfactory. Staves went still. Delta's handler was transferred 6 weeks ago following an incident during a facility evaluation, Cole said. His voice was very even. The incident was documented as uncontrolled aggression. Specialist Torres has provided a written account of what actually occurred during that evaluation. He paused. The incident occurred during an evaluation you personally conducted, Major, with Sergeant Pruitt in attendance. The silence on the floor was total. Every handler had gone quiet. The dogs were working steady and calm, but every human being in that room was listening. I don't see what Torres's account, Staves began. Delta performed a textbook handler protective response, Cole said. You documented it as uncontrolled aggression. Torres was transferred within 48 hours. Delta was isolated and placed on a euthanasia recommendation list. He looked at Staves directly. Torres's account combined with the evaluation recording from that session, which I've pulled from archive, shows that your documentation of the incident was inaccurate. Staves set his tablet down. His aide had stopped writing. There's a recording, Staves said. Facility evaluations are recorded as standard protocol, Cole said. The recording has been reviewed this morning. It is consistent with Torres's account and inconsistent with your incident report. He paused. I've shared both with the Inspector General's office. The word landed like a change in atmospheric pressure. Staves absorbed it without visible reaction, which was itself a kind of reaction, the reaction of a man who has prepared for many scenarios and is now determining which preparation applies. I'd like to see this documentation, Staves said. His voice had changed just slightly, just enough. Of course, Cole said. Warren is waiting in the conference room. What happened in that conference room over the next 90 minutes was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. It was the methodical, precise dismantling of a narrative by someone who had been building the counter-narrative for a very long time and was at last in a room where it could be heard. Warren laid it out piece by piece. The pattern across 3 prior facilities. The personnel rotation data against Staves's authorization signatures, the evaluation scheduling anomalies, the Pruitt administrative logs showing systematic information suppression, Torres's statement against the archived recording, and underneath all of it, assembled across 5 days of direct observation and documentation that was meticulous enough to survive any scrutiny, Lena's evidence, handler testimony, veterinary cross-references, behavioral assessments that had identified correctly and verifiably conditions and situations that the official program record had missed, misclassified, or deliberately obscured. Staves's aide left the room at the 40-minute mark. Cole watched him go and understood that someone was making a phone call. At the 60-minute mark, Staves's attorney arrived by phone. At the 90-minute mark, Staves stopped speaking. Warren closed his case. He looked at Cole. He looked at Lena. And then he looked at Staves and said in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who has been waiting 18 months for this specific moment. Major Staves, I'd like to inform you that this conversation has been recorded and will be submitted as part of a formal Inspector General investigation into the administration of regional K9 program oversight across 4 commands. You are advised to cooperate fully with the review process. Your legal counsel has been notified. Staves looked across the table at Lena Cross. Just for a moment, a long, measured look that contained several things at once. Calculation. Something adjacent to respect. And underneath both of those things, the specific recognition of a man who understands finally and completely that he has been outmaneuvered. You were the one from 18 months ago, he said. Yes, Lena said. They told me that case was closed. Cases don't close, she said. They wait. 3 months later, Blackridge looked the same and felt completely different. The euthanasia recommendations for Shadow Diesel and Delta had been formally withdrawn within 1 week of the inspection. Ranger, the 4th dog on the list, completed his behavioral assessment and was cleared for continued service in a modified handler pairing that Lena had designed before she left. The Ghost Team 7. Evaluation failure was formally attributed to administrative interference in the official record, and the unit's prior 6-quarter excellent rating was restored. Staves was relieved of regional oversight duties pending the conclusion of the IG investigation. The investigation Warren had told Cole was the most comprehensive review of K9 program administration in the command's history. 3 other facilities had come forward with supporting documentation within 2 weeks of the Blackridge findings becoming known inside the system. People who had been holding information alone, afraid to speak because speaking felt pointless, found out that someone had finally made speaking matter. Pruitt cooperated with the investigation. His cooperation produced 2 additional pieces of evidence that closed the last remaining gaps in the intentionality record. His legal situation was ongoing. Cole implemented the full Ghost Unit 7 rehabilitation protocol that Lena had designed during her 5 days at the facility, the environmental modifications to the kennel bays, the acoustic assessments, the handler-dog pairing review process, the stress recognition training for every handler on the floor. He added something she hadn't specified: a monthly review session where handlers could report observations about their dogs without those observations being filtered through a command structure. A direct channel, no intermediaries. He named it the Cross Protocol. And when she heard about it, 3 weeks after she had left the facility, she called him and was quiet for a long moment before she said anything. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I did it." Torres was restored to active K9 duty and formally repaired with Delta. The paperwork went through Cole's desk directly, no intermediary. He signed it himself and walked it to the records office in person. And on the way back, he passed Delta's kennel and stopped for a moment looking at the dog who had spent 6 weeks grieving a person the system had told him he would never see again. Delta was asleep on his side, completely relaxed, the slow, steady breathing of an animal who has found his way back to safety. Webb and Brutus were reassigned to the facility's elite detection unit, a role that used every skill Brutus had, without placing him in deployment conditions that his history made dangerous. Webb had been the one to suggest it. He had done his own research, after learning the full history had submitted a formal proposal for the role modification, and had walked into Cole's office with the proposal and a calmness that told Cole he had processed everything and come out the other side with his eyes open. "He's the best detection dog I've ever worked with," Webb said, setting the proposal on Cole's desk. "He deserves to do that work." "Done," Cole said before he finished reading it. Okafor and Diesel were back at full operational capacity within 6 weeks of treatment. Diesel's movement was clean, and his performance scores in the following evaluation were the highest of his career. Okafor framed the evaluation results and put them on the wall beside his desk, and told anyone who asked that the number on the paper was not the thing he was actually proud of. Marsh and Shadow were the story the rest of the facility told most. Shadow, the dog who had trembled every morning for 3 months, who had been written off as irredeemably compromised, completed his first full training cycle with Marsh with 0 adverse incidents. In the final session, Marsh ran him off lead through a complex tracking sequence, and Shadow completed it without a single correction, working with the easy, grounded confidence of a dog who has been shown enough times to believe it that his environment is safe and his handler is steady. Marsh watched him finish and stood very still. And when Shadow came back to him and sat and looked up at him with the full direct attention of an animal who has chosen where he belongs, Marsh put his hand on the dog's head and said, "Good boy," and meant it in every possible dimension of the words. Lena had been gone for 2 months by then. She had stayed for 11 days total, 6 more than the 3 she'd asked for. And then she had packed her notebook and shaken Cole's hand and walked back through the front gate with no more ceremony than she'd arrived with. Warren had offered her a formal consulting role with the IG's investigation team. She had accepted it on a temporary basis, which Cole understood to mean she would stay until the work was done and leave when it was finished, because staying in one place had never been the shape of what she did. She sent Cole a message 4 months after leaving. No greeting, no preamble characteristic of every communication she had ever sent him. 2 more facilities. Pattern confirmed. Warren has what he needs. It's moving. Cole read it 3 times and then typed back, "The dogs here are good. All of them." Her reply came 6 minutes later. "I know. I always knew they would be." Cole set his phone down and looked out at the floor where his teams were running the afternoon session. All 36 dogs, all 36 handlers, moving through their work with the quality of relationship that had been there all along, underneath everything that had been done to suppress it. It had taken one person walking through a gate with nothing but a notebook and 20 years of understanding that nobody wanted to hear to show him what he had been missing. One person who had refused twice now to let a closed case stay closed. One person who understood that the dogs could not speak for themselves and had decided a long time ago in a way that had cost her significantly that she would speak for them instead, clearly, precisely, and without stopping until someone in a position of authority was finally ready to listen. Cole crossed his arms and watched his program run clean and real, and for the first time in a long time, fully alive, and he understood that what Lena Cross had built at Blackridge was not a temporary correction. It was a foundation, and foundations, when they are laid on truth, do not move.